New set of Illinois laws takes effect July 1st, bringing several changes statewide. Samantha Soto has the story.
As of July 1st, schools across Illinois will face new responsibilities when it comes to student safety and technology.
There are growing reports nationwide of students using AI programs to create explicit or harmful images of classmates, and that raises concerns about safety and accountability.
House Bill 3851 expands the state's definition of cyberbullying to include the use of artificial intelligence to create or share explicit or harmful images of students.
And even though these situations may not happen on campus, as long as they impact students and their ability to receive an education or affect their willingness to participate in after-school activities, this is something that really does need to be addressed.
State Senator Lee Arellano Jr. says the law is designed to prevent harm before it escalates.
The best case outcome is we prevent some of these bad scenarios and even tragedies that happen in bullying.
And while lawmakers work to update state policy, Arellano Jr. says parents play the most important role in keeping kids safe online.
Are you talking to your children? Are you coaching them on what the dangers online are, on what the dangers of images are, on how to react to that? Are you building a relationship of trust so they can talk to you if something happens? Because sometimes you can prevent the really bad outcomes by catching it early and see things develop.
In Rockford, I'm Samantha Soto.
Now, lawmakers say state law already requires schools to provide framework to address bullying. The goal is to give schools more authority to address harmful AI-generated content before it leads to serious consequences.